You didn't have
Time?
time?
No,
Did we get to speak?
but I can wait till when he's done.
Okay, so we have a sheet already.
Thank you.
What is
Yep.
the order supposed to be?
5 and 7?
5 and 7?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, so go
5,
5, 6,
6.
7. Yeah, 5, green, no.
I got a timer here,
Oh, okay. Great.
so I don't go over time.
Okay, yeah, I guess if you go over a little bit, okay.
I need a cigarette. I don't know if I can do it. I haven't smoked in a while. My hands are shaking. Yeah, maybe you should.
Alright, so. Whenever you're ready.
Let's do it.
You good? I'm gonna take a survey, how many people here know about Islam? Like, really studied it? Well, that's fine, because the majority of people actually don't know about Islam. So today, I'm gonna be talking to you about Islam and why it's important. It's important to this topic is important because, it's important to clear up several misconceptions the West or Americans have about Islam. This speech also aims to educate you, the audience, about Islam the right way, because obviously a lot of people misunderstand Islam today. Islam is obviously misunderstood by a majority of people, and it's not just in America, in Europe, in places like Europe and stuff like that. Islam is also misunderstood. So I hope that I communicate with you, the audience, that I clear up the misconceptions about Islam, and I educate people more about Islam. First of all, what is Islam? What does that word mean? Islam comes from the Arabic root salam, which means submission to the will of one God. And in Islam, God is Allah, and Allah is basically the same God. If you read the Bible in Arabic, you can see Allah is written all over the place. I mean, Arab Christians also use the word Allah to describe God. So it's not like Muslims are worshiping a different God, they're worshiping the same God. They just call it a different name, Allah. And if you know Hebrew and Arabic, in Hebrew, the word for God is Eloha, or not Eloha, what is it? Ilah. No, Ilaha, there you go. Ilaha and Allah are both the same beings. So Muslims worship the same God. They're not worshiping some other God. Just that concept of God that's different. Now, what about the Western academic Oriental appeal to sources? Now, this is what's interesting is a lot of Western academics or a lot of Orientalists don't really understand Islamic sources. A lot of Orientalists or Western academics, critics of Islam, quote a lot from biography of the Prophet Muhammad. And for those of you who don't know Prophet Muhammad, he was the founder of Islam. They quote a lot from Ibn Ishaq and Tariq al-Tabari. Now, what's the problem with quoting from these sources? The problem is these sources are weak. They're not acceptable in the eyes of Muslim scholars. Ibn Ishaq has been condemned by great Islamic scholars such as Imam Malik and Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal for being careless in compiling his information. So when critics of Islam, like the Orientalists, or if you go on the internet and if you type in Islam, you're going to see a lot of hate sites quoting a lot from Ibn Ishaq. But the problem with Ibn Ishaq is it's not a reliable source of information about the Prophet Muhammad. Same thing with al-Tabari too. If you go to any anti-Islamic book or website or whatever, they're always going to quote from al-Tabari. And al-Tabari warns people that his books are both filled with weak and authentic stories about the Prophet Muhammad and Islam. So the critics of Islam should appeal to authentic sources to talk about Islam. The authentic sources are the hadith books of the Prophet Muhammad, Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, etc., etc. Ibn Ishaq and al-Tabari are not reliable sources of information about Islam or the Prophet Muhammad. So critics of Islam should educate themselves before talking about these sources. What about the populations of Islam? Now it's commonly said, now I've heard this a lot, that Islam is an Arab religion. Is that true? No, it's not. Only 20% of the Muslim population is Arab. And not even that. I mean, I think the number is even actually lower than that. There are many Arabs living in the Middle East that proclaim Christianity that proclaim Judaism, et cetera, et cetera. So, there are very few Arab Muslims out there. A majority of Muslims are actually in India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, China, et cetera, et cetera. And these obviously aren't Arabs. Now, why do Muslims believe in what they believe in? Muslims obviously feel strongly about the religion of Islam. They believe that there's no religion that provides evidence for itself like Islam. So Muslims don't, so a lot of people have the misconception that, Muslims are Muslims because it's a racial thing, or they're doing it for political reasons or whatever. No, that's not correct. Muslims actually believe Islam is the truth with a capital T. They believe there's no other religion that has evidence for itself like Islam does. So it has nothing to do with a political or racial thing. You see, and I think many Christians will also believe the same thing. Christians won't, say that, I'm a Christian because, of my ethnicity or for political reasons or whatever. Many Christians will say, I'm a Christian because I believe it's the right religion. Well, same thing with Muslims too. A lot of arguments against Islam are basically subjective or emotional. You see, and a lot of Muslims reject these emotional or subjective arguments against Islam. Basically, Muslims say that, okay, you have your emotional arguments about Islam, you can have that, that's fine, but that's not going to stop us from practicing Islam. And unfortunately, in the West, a lot of hate mongers or whatever against Islam use emotional or subjective arguments against Islam. But Muslims don't care, because in the end of the day, Muslims will say, onto you your way, onto me my way. I'm going to practice my religion. You can practice your religion, whether it's Christianity or whatever. Does Islam promote violence or holy war? I think this topic is very important, and unfortunately I can't cover it in the short amount of time that I have. But what I will say is that in Islam, war is either just or unjust. You see, in America, we'll either justify war or it won't justify war. There's no such thing as a holy war in Islam. Jihad simply means struggle. Holy war comes from the Crusades. If you really want to know who made up the term holy war, it was the Crusaders. It was the Christian Crusaders in Europe. Islam never had anything to do with a holy war. There's no such thing as a holy war concept in Islam. So why is this stuff important? You might be asking. You might be saying, well, obviously I don't have anything to do with Muslims. I'm going to do my thing and let Muslims do their own thing. Well, it's important because it's important to learn about Islam the right way. Obviously, there's a lot of misinformation about Islam on the internet and in books, media, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of hate mongering against Islam. It's a huge, I hate to say it's a huge business or whatever. A lot of people thrive on this. So it's important to learn about Islam as honestly as possible, because you don't want to offend Muslims, or you don't want to have the wrong judgment about Muslims, et cetera, et cetera. Because Muslims obviously feel strongly about their religion. So in conclusion, the last thing I want to say is that Americans and others need to stop this racism and fear about Islam. This is wrong and it needs to stop. At the same time, Muslims should stop their own discrimination against Americans in the West. This is wrong and it needs to stop. And the only way this racism or discrimination against either side can stop is if people educate themselves about Islam, so we can promote tolerance, etc. And that's my conclusion. Thank you very much.